goosebumps when I saw it. My presentation, my data, my project, the breakthrough that had consumed 6 months of my life, late nights, missed dinners, endless revisions, was illuminated on the screen at the front of the room, but I wasn't the one presenting it. Faye, my assistant of just 6 months, stood confidently before the executive team, laser pointer in hand, her voice steady and authoritative as she gestured toward my charts. As you can see from these quarterly results, she said, the integration method I've developed will reduce our processing costs by 32%, while simultaneously increasing output efficiency. I felt the air leave my lungs. My integration method, my cost reduction analysis, my efficiency metrics. I gripped the back of an empty chair, my knuckles turning white. This couldn't be happening. Not after everything I'd sacrificed for this project. CEO Brighton leaned forward, clearly impressed. These projections are remarkable, Faye. You've exceeded our expectations. Thank you, she replied with practiced modesty. I believe in aiming high. I nearly stepped forward then, nearly shouted that she was presenting my work, but something made me hesitate. A survival instinct, perhaps. Instead, I slid into a seat at the very back of the room, watching in growing horror as Faye continued. Unfortunately, she lowered her voice conspiratorially, there have been significant leadership inconsistencies with this project that I've had to quietly correct. I've been working behind the scenes for months to keep things on track. The executives exchanged glances. Chief Financial Officer Thea nodded knowingly. We've noticed those leadership concerns, Thea said, her eyes briefly scanning the room. Your initiative is definitely noted, Faye. My stomach clenched. They'd been discussing me. They believed her. I simply couldn't stand by and watch such promising work be mismanaged, Faye continued, her expression a perfect mask of professional concern. The potential impact was too important. I felt dizzy. This wasn't improvised. This was calculated, planned. She'd been undermining me systematically while I'd been trusting her, mentoring her, fighting for her housing allowance when she claimed she couldn't make rent, arranging specialized training when she expressed interest in growing her skills. I'm particularly excited about the implementation timeline, Faye continued, clicking to the next slide. My timeline, accelerated by impossible margins. We can begin rollout next month and achieve full implementation within 60 days. That's significantly faster than previous estimates, Operations Director Penn noted, raising an eyebrow. Previous approaches were unnecessarily cautious, Faye replied smoothly. With the right leadership, we can move much more efficiently. The words cut through me like physical pain. For months, I'd carefully explained to these same executives why rushing implementation would risk quality and sustainability. I'd shown them the data. I'd created contingency plans, and now Faye was casually dismissing all that careful work as unnecessarily cautious, and they were nodding along. I'd like to acknowledge the team members who assisted with data collection, Faye said, displaying a slide with several names, none of which included mine. Their contributions were valuable. My name had been erased. 6 months of my innovation, my leadership, my career, gone. The room broke into applause as Faye concluded her presentation. Several executives stood, approaching her with congratulations and follow-up questions. No one noticed me sitting frozen in the back row, my world collapsing around me. I remained there, barely breathing, as the meeting continued to other agenda items. I couldn't process what had just happened. How long had she been planning this? How had I missed the signs? As the meeting concluded, I slipped out before anyone could see me. I needed space to think, to understand what had just happened and what it meant for my future at the company. In the hallway, I heard Brighton's voice around the corner. Faye, I'd like you to join the leadership lunch today. We should discuss your future here. I'd be honored, Faye replied warmly. I ducked into a supply closet as they passed, not ready to face either of them. Through the crack in the door, I caught a glimpse of Faye's face. There was no guilt there, no conflict, only triumph. As their footsteps faded, a cold certainty settled in my chest. This wasn't just about a stolen presentation. This was a calculated takedown. And if I didn't act quickly, it would be complete. But how do you fight back when someone has already convinced everyone that you're the problem? The answer came to me slowly as I stood in that dark closet, my hands trembling with rage and shock. You don't fight. Not directly. You wait. You watch. And you let them destroy themselves. If you're finding this story gripping so far, please like this video and subscribe to hear how this workplace betrayal unfolds. Comment below if you've ever experienced someone taking credit for your work. I read every comment and would love to hear your stories. Now, let's continue with what happened next. My name is Soren Vilas. Until that morning, I was the youngest innovation director the company had ever appointed. I'd earned that position through a decade of relentless work, creative problem solving, and an unwavering commitment to ethical leadership. I'd grown up in a small town where people valued honesty above all else. My mother raised me alone after my father died when I was 8. She worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, teaching me that integrity and perseverance would always win in the end. Good work speaks for itself, she'd say. You don't need to step on others to rise. I'd believed that, I'd lived by it, and for 10 years it had proven true, until Faye Mercer walked into my life. I first met Faye during her interview. She'd been recommended by Weston, one of our vice presidents, who mentioned she had enormous potential. Her resume was impressive: top business school, relevant internships, glowing recommendations. But it was her apparent passion that won me over. I want to learn everything, she'd told me, leaning forward with earnest intensity. I've followed your career, and the innovation you've brought to this industry is exactly what inspired me to pursue this path. I would be honored to learn from you. I was flattered, of course, but more importantly, I saw myself in her, ambitious, eager to prove herself, determined to make a difference. I hired her as my executive assistant the next day. For the first 2 months, Faye was exemplary. She arrived early, stayed late, asked insightful questions, and completed tasks with remarkable efficiency. She organized my chaotic schedule, streamlined our department's communication process, and even created a more effective system for project tracking. The team loved her. You struck gold with that one, my colleague DM told me over lunch one day. Most assistants just wait to be told what to do. She actually thinks ahead. I agreed. I began including Faye in more meetings, giving her greater responsibility, introducing her to key stakeholders across the company. I wanted her to grow. I believed in developing talent. When she mentioned struggling with housing costs 3 months in, I personally advocated for her to receive the housing allowance typically reserved for manager-level employees. When she expressed interest in advanced data analysis, I arranged for her to attend an exclusive training program on the company's dime. You're investing a lot in someone who's just an assistant, Thea, our CFO, remarked after I'd approved Faye's 3rd professional development opportunity. She won't be just an assistant for long, I replied confidently. She's going to be a star here. I'm just making sure she has the tools she needs. Thea gave me a curious look. Just make sure you're not training your replacement, she said. I laughed it off as typical CFO paranoia. Meanwhile, the integration project had become my primary focus. The company needed to revolutionize our processing system to remain competitive, and I developed an approach that could transform our entire operation model. The executive team had given me 6 months to prove the concept, with quarterly updates required. The first 2 quarterly presentations had gone well. The executives were cautiously optimistic but wanted more data before fully committing to the new approach. I understood their hesitation. This was a significant shift that would affect every department. I needed the final quarterly presentation to be irrefutable, compelling enough to secure full funding for implementation. I worked obsessively, often sleeping in my office. Faye frequently joined these late nights, bringing dinner, offering insights, helping refine the presentation. This is going to change everything, she'd say, her eyes bright with excitement as we reviewed the latest results. They won't be able to say no. I trusted her completely. She'd become not just my assistant, but my collaborator, my sounding board, someone who seemed to share my vision and values. One evening, about 2 weeks before the final presentation, I returned from a brief coffee break to find Faye at my computer. Sorry, she said, quickly closing whatever she'd been looking at. I was just checking if those processing numbers had come in yet. No problem, I replied, thinking nothing of it. We'd long ago reached the point where such boundaries seemed unnecessary between us. Any updates from the test run? Not yet, she said, gathering her things. I'm actually heading out a bit early tonight if that's okay. Dinner with an old friend from college. Of course, I said. You've been putting in too many extra hours anyway. Enjoy your evening. She smiled warmly. You're the best boss anyone could ask for, Soren. As she left, I noticed she'd forgotten her notebook, a sleek leather journal she carried everywhere. I picked it up, intending to place it in her desk drawer for safekeeping. It fell open as I lifted it, revealing a page filled with notes. What caught my eye wasn't the content but the heading, Executive Committee Meeting Notes. A meeting I hadn't been aware of. A meeting my assistant shouldn't have been attending without me. I hesitated, my finger holding the page. Reading someone's private notes felt wrong, against everything I believed about professional respect. But something felt off. I scanned the page quickly and felt my blood go cold. Discussed concerns about Soren's project management, acknowledged leadership weaknesses, suggested more direct oversight. Below that, Brighton receptive to alternative leadership structure. Weston, supporting transition plan. Need to demonstrate clear superiority in next presentation. And finally, underlined twice. Accelerated timeline key to securing position. Promise big, adjust expectations later if necessary. I closed the notebook with shaking hands and returned it to her desk. That night, I couldn't sleep. Was I misinterpreting innocent notes? Was there a reasonable explanation? The next morning, I watched Faye carefully. She was the same as always. Efficient, supportive, enthusiastic about our project. I almost convinced myself I'd misunderstood what I'd read. But then I noticed other things. How she would be absent for stretches without explanation. How certain executives had stopped meeting with me directly, routing requests through her instead. How she had begun using I rather than we when discussing project elements with others. 1 week before the presentation, I tried addressing it directly. Faye, is there anything we need to discuss about the project leadership? I asked as casually as I could manage. She looked up from her tablet with perfect innocence. What do you mean? I've just noticed you've been having meetings I'm not aware of. With the executive team. Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that I'd discovered this, but it vanished instantly. Oh, just some administrative details they needed clarified. Nothing important enough to bother you with. She smiled warmly. You know how they like to micromanage sometimes. I was just shielding you from the tedious stuff. Her explanation was reasonable, plausible, but something in her tone left me unsettled. Next time, please let me know, I said firmly. As project lead, I should be aware of all communications with executives about our work. Of course, she agreed readily. I should have realized. It won't happen again. The morning of the presentation, I woke to a minor car accident on the highway that delayed me by 15 minutes. I called Faye to let her know. Don't worry, she assured me. I'll let them know you're running late. Everything's set up and ready. I thanked her, relieved to have someone so competent to rely on. Little did I know, those 15 minutes would change everything. Those 15 minutes were all she needed to complete her takeover, to present my work as her own, to position herself as the savior of a project supposedly mismanaged by me, to erase 6 months of my innovation and leadership. As I sat in my office after the presentation, staring at the sudden restriction notifications on my project access, one thought kept circling in my mind. How do you reclaim what was stolen when the thief has convinced everyone it was never yours to begin with? I sat in my office, staring at my computer screen where 3 separate notifications informed me my access to the integration project had been restricted. My project, my innovation, my career-defining work. A message from IT cited temporary security protocols during project transition as the reason. There was nothing temporary about this. Faye had been planning this takeover for weeks, possibly months, and I had been blind to it. A knock at my door startled me. It was DM, my colleague from marketing. Her expression was a mixture of concern and discomfort. I just heard, she said, hovering in the doorway. Are you okay? Heard what exactly? I asked, curious about which version of events was circulating. DM stepped inside, closing the door behind her. That phase taking over the integration project. They're saying you've been struggling with the leadership aspects, that she's been quietly keeping things on track. She winced. I didn't believe it. That doesn't sound like you at all. I nodded slowly, processing this. And what are people saying about today's presentation? That you missed it completely, that Faye had to step in last minute. DM hesitated. Soren, what really happened? I considered my options carefully. Launching into an emotional defense might feel satisfying, but it would likely backfire. People rarely side with someone who appears desperate. I was 15 minutes late due to a car accident on the highway, I said calmly. When I arrived, Faye was presenting my work as her own. She'd apparently informed the executives I wouldn't be attending at all. DM's eyes widened. That's theft. Intellectual theft. You need to report this. To whom? I asked quietly. The executives who just congratulated her? HR, who takes direction from those same executives. She spent months laying groundwork. DM. She's convinced them I'm incompetent while positioning herself as the solution. But it's your work, DM insisted. You have documentation, drafts, emails, which I suddenly can't access, I replied, gesturing to my computer. And even if I could, it would be my word against hers. She's been included in every aspect of the project. She could easily claim collaborative credit, or that she was the true innovator while I was just managing timelines. DM sank into the chair across from me. This is insane. What are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What could I do when Faye had so thoroughly outmaneuvered me? I'm going to be very, very careful, I said finally, and I'm going to watch what happens next. After DM left, I began methodically downloading what information I could still access to my personal drive. Not the project itself, those permissions were already revoked, but peripheral data, meeting minutes, general communications, previous presentations. Anything that might help me piece together how this happened and, more importantly, what Faye had promised the executives, because one detail kept nagging at me. The implementation timeline she'd presented was impossible. 60 days for full implementation? We'd determined months ago that 6 months was the absolute minimum for a safe, effective rollout. The technical infrastructure alone would take 12 weeks to properly test. Faye hadn't just stolen my work. She'd made promises that couldn't be kept. As I was gathering these materials, my desk phone rang. It was Brighton, the CEO, asking me to come to his office. My heart raced as I made my way there, uncertain what to expect. Brighton wasn't alone. Thea, the CFO, was there too, along with Penn from operations. Their expressions were professionally neutral, never a good sign. Soren, Brighton began after I'd taken a seat. We wanted to discuss the integration project with you directly. I nodded, waiting. Let them show their hand first. We understand there was some confusion today about the presentation, he continued carefully. Faye indicated you were dealing with some personal matters and wouldn't be able to attend. I was delayed by a traffic accident, I corrected calmly. I called Faye to let her know I'd be 15 minutes late. When I arrived, she was presenting the project as her own work. The executives exchanged glances. That's concerning, Penn said slowly. However, Faye has been providing us with regular updates on the project for several weeks now. She's raised some legitimate concerns about the implementation approach. What concerns specifically? I asked. Your timeline was overly cautious, Thea said. 6 months for implementation is excessive. Faye has outlined how we can achieve the same results in 60 days. That timeline is impossible, I stated flatly. The system integration alone requires 12 weeks of testing to ensure data integrity. Rushing implementation risks critical failures across all departments. Faye believes those estimates are padded, Brighton replied. She suggested your approach was unnecessarily risk-averse. I took a careful breath. May I ask how long Faye has been discussing these concerns with you, and why I wasn't included in those conversations? Another uncomfortable exchange of glances. She first approached Weston about 6 weeks ago, Brighton admitted. She expressed concern that you might take criticism personally, given your investment in the project. She suggested we allow her to work with you behind the scenes to address the issues. 6 weeks. While I was working 16-hour days to perfect this project, Faye had been systematically undermining me. I see. I said, keeping my voice steady. And did anyone consider verifying these concerns with me directly? We intended to discuss it after seeing the final presentation, Penn said. But your absence today raised additional concerns about commitment. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. By making me appear absent for the presentation, Faye had confirmed every doubt she'd planted. What happens now? I asked. We believe the integration project needs new leadership, Brighton said. Faye has demonstrated exceptional initiative and a clear vision for implementation. We're appointing her as project lead effective immediately. I nodded slowly, processing this. And my role? We value your contributions, Thea said smoothly. We'd like you to support the transition, and then perhaps explore other opportunities within the company that might better align with your methodical approach. Translation. I was being sidelined. The project I'd created was being handed to my assistant, and I was being pushed toward the exit. I understand, I said, rising from my chair. Will there be anything else? They seemed surprised by my calm acceptance. They'd clearly expected anger, defensiveness, perhaps even tears, emotional reactions that would further confirm Faye's narrative about my unsuitability for leadership. That's all for now, Brighton said. We'll set up a transition meeting tomorrow. I nodded and left the office, my mind racing. In the hallway, I nearly collided with Faye herself. She was emerging from a meeting room with Weston, both of them laughing about something. Her smile flickered only momentarily when she saw me, then returned with practiced warmth. Soren, I was just looking for you. Do you have a moment to discuss the transition timeline? The audacity was breathtaking. Of course, I replied with professional courtesy. Your office? Or mine? Mine might be better, she said. I have all the updated materials there. Her office, which until this morning had been a small workspace adjacent to mine, suitable for an assistant. She'd already moved into a larger office down the hall, one previously occupied by a senior manager who'd left the previous month. She'd been planning this down to the office arrangements. As we walked, Weston called after her. Don't forget our dinner meeting tonight, Faye. The client is excited to meet the new project lead. She waved acknowledgement, then turned back to me with a sympathetic expression that never reached her eyes. Change can be difficult, she said as we entered her new office. But I want you to know I value everything you've taught me. I sat across from her desk, my project materials already arranged on her shelves, her name already on the door. How long have you been planning this, Faye? I asked quietly. She tilted her head, considering whether to maintain the pretense. Then she shrugged slightly. Does it matter? It's done. I'm curious about the strategy, I said. Professional interest, you might say. A small, satisfied smile played at her lips. From the beginning, if you want the truth. The moment I researched you before my interview, I knew you were the perfect stepping stone. Brilliant but trusting. Innovative but conflict-averse. You create value but don't know how to claim it. She leaned forward. People like you invent things. People like me turn those inventions into power. And the impossible timeline? 60 days for full implementation? By the time anyone realizes it can't be done in 60 days, I'll have established my position, she said dismissively. I'll cite unforeseen technical complications, adjust expectations, and still deliver faster than your overcautious 6-month timeline. I'll be the hero either way. And if critical systems fail during rushed implementation, if client data is compromised, she waved this away. Temporary setbacks at worst. The benefits outweigh the risks. The risks to whom? I asked. The company? The clients? The employees whose jobs depend on these systems functioning properly? Something hardened in her expression. Business isn't personal, Soren. That's always been your problem. You care too much about hypothetical consequences and not enough about winning. She checked her watch. Now, about the transition. I'll need all your notes on client relationships by tomorrow morning, and I'd appreciate if you'd clarify any questions from the team, confirming my leadership. The sheer calculating coldness of it left me momentarily speechless. She wasn't just stealing my work. She was expecting me to facilitate the theft. Of course, I finally replied, rising from my chair. Business isn't personal, after all. Her smile returned victorious. I'm glad we understand each other. As I walked back to my office, a strange calm settled over me. The shock was fading, replaced by something colder and more focused. Faye had revealed something crucial in our conversation. She didn't just want my project. She wanted me to validate her takeover, to publicly accept her authority, to transfer my relationships and knowledge to her. She needed my cooperation more than she was admitting, and that gave me leverage. Over the next few days, I maintained a careful facade of resigned acceptance. I attended the transition meetings, answered technical questions when asked, and began clearing personal items from my office. To all outward appearances, I was preparing for my professional demise with quiet dignity. But beneath this compliant exterior, I was meticulously documenting everything. Every impossible promise Faye made to executives, every technical specification she didn't fully understand but claimed mastery of, every client relationship she was rushing to establish without understanding the history or context. I watched as she accelerated timelines, bypassed testing protocols, and dismissed warnings from the technical team. I noticed how she isolated team members who raised concerns, replacing them with people who wouldn't question her judgment. I observed her growing confidence as executives praised her bold leadership and decisive action. 1 week into her leadership, the first cracks appeared. A preliminary test failed spectacularly, corrupting a sample dataset that took 3 days to restore. Faye blamed the technical team publicly, while privately pushing for workarounds to maintain her timeline. "We can't skip the integrity testing," Naris, our lead systems architect, insisted during a tense meeting. "The risk to client data is too high. We have deadlines to meet," Faye countered. "Find a way to streamline the tests." "There is no streamlining this," Naris pushed back. "Either we test thoroughly or we risk catastrophic data corruption." "That sounds like an excuse for inefficiency," Faye said coldly. "Perhaps we need someone leading the technical team who understands our priorities." After the meeting, Naris sought me out, visibly shaken. "She's going to get us all fired," she whispered. "These deadlines are insane. The system will fail if we rush implementation." "Document everything," I advised quietly. "Every warning, every risk assessment, every test result. Send copies to your personal email as backup." "Why bother?" Naris asked bitterly. "The executives aren't listening. They're completely under her spell." "They won't be forever," I said, "especially when promises aren't kept." By the end of the second week, Faye had committed to 3 major clients that their portions of the integration would be completed within 30 days. She'd promised the board a preliminary success report by the same deadline. She'd begun taking credit for additional innovations that had nothing to do with the original project. She was overreaching, dramatically. Meanwhile, I had accepted lunch invitations from 2 competing companies, making sure word would get back to Faye that I was exploring options elsewhere. As expected, this accelerated her efforts to solidify her position before I could potentially poach the project for a competitor. In her haste, she made her first major tactical error. She scheduled a comprehensive presentation for all major stakeholders, executives, key clients, department heads, to unveil the accelerated implementation strategy in its entirety. A high-visibility event where she would publicly commit to timelines and deliverables. An event where any failure would be equally visible. The day before this crucial presentation, I submitted my official resignation letter, effective in 2 weeks. Within an hour, Faye was in my office, her expression a mixture of triumph and suspicion. "Giving up?" she asked, waving the resignation letter. "Accepting reality," I replied calmly. The integration project was my primary responsibility here. Without it, there's no reason for me to stay. She studied me carefully, looking for signs of deception or hidden agendas. "Where are you going?" she asked finally. "I'm considering options," I said vaguely. "Several companies have expressed interest." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Competitors?" I shrugged. "I haven't made any decisions yet." "You understand that any attempt to replicate my integration approach elsewhere would constitute intellectual property theft," she said, the warning clear in her tone. The audacity almost made me laugh. "I would never dream of stealing someone else's work," I replied, holding her gaze. She seemed satisfied, if still somewhat wary. "Will you be attending tomorrow's stakeholder presentation?" I assumed I wasn't invited. On the contrary, she said with manufactured generosity, I think it would show good leadership transition for you to be there, supporting the project's evolution. Translation. She wanted me visible but silent, my presence serving as tacit endorsement of her leadership. In that case, I'll be there, I agreed. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Brighton. I wanted to check in personally, he said, his tone more informal than in our previous conversation. Your resignation letter was professionally handled, but I sense there's more you might want to say. An opening, a small one, but significant. I believe the integration project is heading for serious problems, I said carefully. The implementation timeline is fundamentally impossible without compromising system integrity. When I attempted to raise these concerns, I was removed from the project. A long pause followed. These are serious allegations, Soren. They're not allegations. They're professional assessments based on technical realities, I corrected gently. The stakeholder presentation tomorrow will include commitments that cannot be fulfilled without significant risk to client data and system functionality. Another pause. What would you suggest at this point? He asked finally. I can't tell you what to do, I replied. But if I were in your position, I would listen very carefully to what's promised tomorrow, and I would have contingency plans ready when those promises prove impossible to keep. After we hung up, I sat in my darkened apartment, reviewing my own contingency plans. Brighton's call suggested the first hairline fractures in Faye's carefully constructed narrative. He was uncertain enough to reach out directly, bypassing both Faye and HR protocols. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small opening in the fortress she'd built. Tomorrow would determine whether that opening was enough. The stakeholder presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the main conference center. I arrived early, choosing a seat toward the back where I could observe without being immediately visible. Gradually, the room filled with executives, department heads, key technical staff, and representatives from our major client companies. Faye worked the room masterfully, greeting each person with personalized attention, projecting absolute confidence. She dressed impeccably in a power suit that eerily mimicked Brighton's signature style, a subtle visual alignment with the company's leadership. As the presentation began, I watched the faces around me, the executives, eager for the promised revolutionary results, the clients, excited about accelerated timelines, the technical team, tense with the knowledge of what was being promised versus what was possible, and Faye, radiant with triumph as she stood before them all, presenting detailed timelines, technical specifications, and business projections, ACL, all impossible, all destined to fail, and all stolen from my work, but stripped of the safety measures and realistic timeframes I'd built in. I remained perfectly still, my expression neutral, as she confidently promised deliverables that would require breaking the laws of physics to achieve. I made no reaction when she claimed proprietary innovations that I had developed. I showed no emotion when she presented implementation schedules that bypassed critical safety protocols. I simply waited. And then, as she opened the floor for questions, the moment I'd been anticipating arrived. Linval, the CEO of our largest client company, stood up. So, our product launch on the 15th is confirmed? Your previous message guaranteed it. Absolutely, Faye nodded confidently. Orla from our second largest client rose next. And our specifications require the enhanced security capabilities you promised? The ones that exceed industry standards? Of course, Faye assured her smoothly. Those enhancements are central to our approach. Then Kai, representing our newest major client, stood. We've already announced our expansion based on your guaranteed timeline. Our shareholders have been informed of the integration date. There can be no delays. As I've promised, we'll deliver, Faye said, her smile unwavering. From my seat, I could see Neris and the technical team exchanging alarmed glances. These weren't general promises anymore. These were specific commitments with precise dates and deliverables, being confirmed on the record in front of everyone who mattered. Penn, our operations director, frowned slightly. These timelines don't align with the capacity discussions we had last quarter. I've developed innovative workarounds, Faye insisted. Can you explain those workarounds in technical detail? Penn pressed. The integration points you're describing typically require extensive testing phases. This was the moment. The technical question she couldn't answer without revealing either her ignorance or the impossibility of her promises. As Faye began a circular explanation, heavy on business jargon, but light on technical specifics, I saw Brighton watching her with growing concern. He glanced around the room, his eyes eventually finding me in the back row. The fortress was beginning to crumble. Faye's explanation grew increasingly convoluted as she attempted to answer Penn's technical question. I could see the confusion spreading across the room, executives exchanging glances, technical team members shifting uncomfortably, clients leaning forward with growing concern. Perhaps a specific example would help, Penn suggested, his tone professional but pointed. Walk us through how you'll achieve the security integration for Orla's specifications while maintaining the accelerated timeline. Faye smiled confidently, but I noticed a slight tension around her eyes. Of course, we'll utilize advanced parallel processing to compress the testing phase while maintaining integrity checks through automated validation sequences. It sounded impressive if you didn't understand the technical impossibility of what she was describing. Several members of the technical team were now openly exchanging alarmed looks. That's not possible with our current infrastructure, Neris said suddenly, unable to contain herself. Parallel processing can't replace sequential security validation without compromising data integrity. I've developed proprietary methods to overcome those limitations, Faye countered smoothly. Methods that weren't previously considered. What methods specifically? Brighton asked, his expression now openly concerned. As Faye launched into another jargon-heavy, substance-light explanation, I saw the precise moment when doubt began to crystallize in the room. The technical team was now visibly distressed. The clients were exchanging troubled glances. The executives were beginning to realize they'd been sold impossible promises. Brighton's eyes found mine again across the room. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Soren, he called out, interrupting Faye mid-sentence. You were the original project lead. In your professional assessment, is this implementation timeline feasible? The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when Faye's carefully constructed house of cards would either collapse entirely or somehow remain standing despite the growing winds of doubt. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every gaze. Faye's expression was a fascinating mix of confidence and barely concealed panic. The timeline as presented is not technically feasible, I said clearly. The integration points require sequential testing that cannot be compressed beyond certain physical limitations. Attempting to bypass these requirements would create significant risks to data integrity and system functionality. Murmurs spread through the room. Faye's smile hardened. With all due respect, she interjected, that assessment reflects the overly cautious approach that necessitated leadership changes on this project. Innovation requires bold action. Innovation also requires technical feasibility, I countered calmly. Bold promises don't change the underlying technical requirements. Brighton leaned forward. Are you saying these deadlines can't be met? Not as presented, I confirmed. Not without compromising system integrity in ways that would create unacceptable risks for our clients. Linval, our largest client, stood again. What kind of risks are we talking about? Data corruption, security vulnerabilities, system instability, I listed. In the worst case, complete integration failure that could affect your existing systems. The room erupted in concerned conversations. Faye attempted to regain control, her voice rising slightly. These are worst-case scenarios that assume traditional approaches. My methodology. What methodology? Neris interrupted. We've been asking for specific technical plans for 2 weeks and receiving only generalities and accelerated deadlines. The technical details are complex, Faye began. Yet you've had no trouble making specific promises to clients, Penn observed. Brighton raised his hand, silencing the room. This is concerning. Very concerning. He turned to me. Soren, you've been working on this project from the beginning. Is there any viable path forward that could satisfy our clients' needs? This was the opening I'd been waiting for. Not just to expose Faye's deception, but to salvage the project itself. to transform this moment from pure revenge into something constructive. Yes, I said. There is. I moved to the front of the room, aware of Faye's tightly controlled expression as I passed her. I connected my tablet to the presentation system, and my contingency plan appeared on screen. This is a revised implementation approach that maintains the core innovations of the original project while establishing realistic timelines. It won't deliver everything in 60 days, but it will provide phased implementation with guaranteed deliverables at each stage. I walked through the plan methodically, highlighting how each client's most critical needs would be addressed first, with complete integration following a responsible timeline. This approach reduces risk while still accelerating our original 6-month timeline to 4 months. It's ambitious but technically sound. The room grew quiet as I finished. Brighton looked to the clients. Would this phased approach work for your needs? After some discussion, all 3 client representatives agreed that the revised timeline would be acceptable if the critical first phase deliverables were guaranteed. They can be, I confirmed. We've already completed the foundational work. What we can't do is rush the integration points without creating unacceptable risks. Brighton nodded slowly, then turned to Faye. How do you respond to this alternative approach? Her composure was remarkable, even now. It's unnecessarily conservative. My approach? Your approach doesn't actually exist, does it? Brighton interrupted, his tone hardening. There are no proprietary methods or innovative workarounds, are there? The room went completely still. Faye straightened, adjusting her strategy in real time. The technical details need refinement, certainly. But the vision, is stolen? Nearest said flatly. The entire project was Soren's work. The technical architecture, the integration approach, everything. You just removed the safety measures and doubled the speed. Faye's eyes narrowed. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth, Neris insisted, looking around the room for support. Other team members nodded in agreement. Brighton turned to me. Soren, is this accurate? Was the project taken from you? I met his gaze directly. I was 15 minutes late to the quarterly presentation due to a traffic accident. When I arrived, Faye was presenting my work as her own. She had already been meeting with executives for weeks, positioning herself to take over the project. That's absurd, Faye countered. I've been developing this approach independently for months. Soren is simply bitter about being replaced due to his ineffective leadership. There's an easy way to settle this, I said calmly. I turned to Brighton. 3 weeks ago, I submitted a comprehensive technical document detailing every aspect of the integration project, including risk assessments and alternative approaches. It was filed under project code ISX 7741. Brighton looked to Penn, who nodded and quickly accessed the document on his tablet. After reviewing it briefly, his expression hardened. This document, authored by Soren, contains everything presented today, including the exact integration approach Faye claimed to have developed. It also explicitly warns against the accelerated timeline, detailing the precise risks we've been discussing. Faye's composure finally cracked. That document was collaborative. I contributed significantly to Classed. You're not listed anywhere as a contributor, Penn interrupted, showing the document metadata, and it was created months before you raised concerns about Soren's leadership. The room fell silent again as the full scope of the deception became clear. Brighton's expression was thunderous. Faye, please wait in my office. We'll discuss this privately. He turned to the clients. I apologize deeply for this situation. We will proceed with Soren's phased implementation plan, with additional resources allocated to ensure we meet the critical first phase deadlines. As the meeting reorganized around implementing my contingency plan, Faye gathered her materials with rigid control, her eyes meeting mine briefly as she left. There was no remorse there, only cold fury at having been outmaneuvered. In that moment, I felt no satisfaction, no vindictive joy, only a profound weariness and a determination to salvage what mattered. A project that could genuinely benefit our clients and company if implemented correctly. The next 3 hours were spent in detailed technical discussions, rebuilding trust with clients, and realigning the team around realistic goals. By the time we finished, a viable path forward had been established, with my leadership reinstated and additional resources allocated to ensure success. As I was gathering my notes, Brighton asked me to join him in his office. I steeled myself, uncertain what to expect. He was alone when I entered, Faye nowhere to be seen. "She's been escorted from the building," he said, answering my unspoken question. "Her employment has been terminated, effective immediately. Legal is reviewing whether further action is warranted regarding her misrepresentations to clients." I nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. "I owe you an apology," Brighton continued. "I should have verified her claims directly with you. I allowed myself to be manipulated." "She was very convincing," I acknowledged. "That's no excuse. Good leadership requires due diligence, not just accepting what sounds promising." He sighed heavily. "The question now is whether you're still planning to resign." I considered this carefully. "What happens with the integration project?" "It's yours, obviously, with whatever resources you need to implement it properly." He paused. "And I'd like to discuss a promotion to innovation director for the entire division. We need leadership that values both innovation and integrity." The offer was unexpected. After everything that had happened, I'd been prepared to walk away completely. "I'll need time to consider it," I said honestly. "Of course." He hesitated, then asked the question that clearly troubled him most. "How did you know? How did you know exactly how this would play out?" I thought about Faye's fundamental miscalculation. Inimakis, her belief that in business, winning was all that mattered, regardless of whether what you promised was actually possible. "I didn't force anything to happen today," I said carefully. "I simply created a space where the truth could emerge. Technical reality doesn't bend to ambition or manipulation. The laws of physics apply even in corporate boardrooms." Brighton nodded slowly. "A lesson we won't forget. The question is whether you're willing to stay and help us remember it." As I left his office, I passed the now empty workspace that had briefly been Faye's executive office. The nameplate had already been removed. The space returned to neutrality, as if she had never existed here at all. My phone buzzed with a text from Neris. "Team gathering at Luca's after work. We're celebrating the return of sanity. You coming?" I smiled slightly. Perhaps there was something worth rebuilding here after all. In the end, Faye's fundamental error wasn't stealing my work or making impossible promises. It was believing that perception could permanently override reality, that if you controlled the narrative skillfully enough, you could make others believe anything, indefinitely. But reality always reasserts itself eventually. Data integrity requirements don't vanish because they're inconvenient. Technical limitations don't disappear through confident presentations. Truth finds its way to the surface, especially when someone is patient enough to create the conditions for it to emerge. As I walked toward the elevator, I passed the conference room where other teams were working. Through the glass, I could see people collaborating, challenging ideas respectfully, building on each other's strengths. That was how real innovation happened, not through manipulation and theft, but through genuine collaboration and integrity. My revenge, if you could call it that, hadn't been about destroying Faye. It had been about creating a moment of clarity where truth became undeniable, where promises collided with reality in front of everyone who mattered. Sometimes the most effective response to deception isn't a counter-deception, but simply a patient commitment to truth. Sometimes you don't need to fight fire with fire. You just need to wait for the fire to run out of oxygen. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's restoration. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful workplace narratives. Have you ever faced a situation where patience and truth prevailed over manipulation? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else facing a similar challenge. Remember, in a world where deception often seems to win, integrity still matters. Thanks for listening.